All right, everybody. Hopefully your journey into chapter 1 hasn't been too bad so far. But I'm here to kind of help put some big ideas together, especially looking at getting into anatomy and physiology. Maybe for the first time, it can feel a little overwhelming. So some advice as you go throughout the semester: come up with stories, mnemonics, define things in common terms that'll help them stick more. So that's the point of these videos, is to kind of help you put big ideas together and show you some tips on how to remember things. So let's start with our organ systems, because that's really the whole point of studying the human body and how we organize it, is into these discrete areas where these organs work together for a common function. So starting with the list of all of the organ systems. So rather than trying to memorize a list, come up with a mnemonic. Make it stick that way. The mnemonic I always use is CRU, so C-R-U. She's an R-N, and maybe she was really mean, so it was a big deal. She smiled, so S-M-I-L-E-D. And that will get you each of your organ systems. So we'll go through each one at a time. So starting with the first one, that's your cardiovascular system. Some textbooks you'll see the word circulatory. Circulatory is not as descriptive. It tells you that you're kind of moving things around. But cardiovascular gives you a little bit more, because card right here, that means heart. Vascular, that means vessel. So it actually tells you the major players in that system. So you have a pump moving things through tubes to help transport. So when you're also doing big concepts, I do recommend make a table. So we'll turn this into a table. So we have our organ system. And then over here, let's do function. Okay, so if we turn this into a table, we'll have the system and then we'll have the function over here. Now again, don't try to memorize large chunks of information or definitions from a chapter. It's not going to stick. Pare it down to 1 or 2 words that make sense. So cardiovascular, what's its function? What is it for? It's for transport. So you're transporting things like nutrients, waste, gases. Most people are familiar with the idea that the red blood cells carry oxygen, but they also carry CO2. You can use it to move hormones around for chemical communication, but it all boils down to that's their job. You have blood that you're circulating to move things around in the body. All right, let's go respiratory for our R here. Okay, so respiratory, since we just talked about those gases being transported by the cardiovascular system, respiratory is that exchange that allows you to get that fresh oxygen in and that waste product CO2 out. So the job here is gas exchange. If we go with our urinary system next. Okay, the main function for that one, I always think of it as kind of providing homeostasis. It's monitoring our fluids, what we need, and then removing stuff that's waste. So basically the idea here is you're going to get a sample from blood. And once you have that sample, it's going to put it on a conveyor belt. So long tubes, twist and turns, increases surface area. And there's stuff that your body's like, oh, we're a little low on this. We'll pull it back into the body. Or if there's stuff that your body's like, oh, this is a toxin or a drug, we don't need it, we'll put it on that conveyor belt. And then it will end up in the trash. Or in the case of real body, it'll end up in the toilet, hopefully. So the urinary system is kind of making that judgment call and removing waste. So that's going to be your main function here, is waste removal. All right, our next R, so there's 2 systems with R, is reproductive. With the reproductive system, don't define it by using the term. So don't say the function is reproduce. What does reproduce mean? Again, use things in the language that you're used to in common conversation. So reproductive system makes babies. That's its function. Then we go to my personal favorite. I geek out about this one, is nervous system. With the nervous system, it is your electrical communication. You do have 2 systems for communication, so I do want to kind of point out the other one. So nervous system is one. The other one is endocrine. So why have 2? It feels a little redundant. They do it differently. Nervous system is going to be your fast electrical communication versus endocrine down here. If you ever see that one, think hormones. That's chemical communication. So nervous system would be kind of like back in my day, we didn't have cell phones. We actually had a phone hooked up to a wire, and you would look outside and all those wires connected down the street. So nervous system is just like that. You have these wires that'll directly go to the target and send that information, but it's Immediate. As soon as you think, kick that muscle out, it'll do it. Endocrine is more like messages in a bottle. You're going to take these chemical messages and you're going to put them in blood and they're going to diffuse across the whole body to get to their target. So it'd be like taking a bunch of messages, putting them in bottles, throwing them in the river. Everybody can kind of get the message, but it's going to take a lot longer. So why have two systems? It seems a little redundant. They're both communication. Personally, I love the nervous system, so I think immediate communication seems really useful. But aren't there some times we want it to go a little bit slower? Like, think of a time in life when hormones were really in charge. Yeah, puberty. We don't want that to go instantaneously. How awkward would that half an hour of your life be if all those changes happened within like 5 minutes? Like, ooh, those weren't there before. So we want to slow down some of those processes. So the endocrine communication, this is going to be your chemical communication. And those are going to be widespread across the body versus the nervous system that's immediate and it's one target. So that's another thing. So it's not just speed, but it's also how much of the body are you talking to. So another example for endocrine is even just mom when she's pregnant, kind of preparing for that baby to be born. There's a lot more things that have to happen in the body, like diverting nutrients, developing an umbilical cord, but also preparing the breast for feeding. So more than one target than, say, the nervous system that just wants to talk to a particular muscle. All right, so now let's go to skeletal. Skeletal makes up your framework. It is your skeleton. So this one's structural. It's really what prevents you from being a pile of goo in your chair. Then we have our muscular. Muscular's for movement. That one's not really surprising for most people. And we're creating specifically with this one conscious movement. There are tons of different muscles in the body that you can't consciously control, but when you talk about the muscular system, you're talking about the ones that are pulling on the skeleton for the most part, that you're consciously aware of. So as I'm flailing my arms around on the screen, I'm using the muscular system to do those movements, pulling on the skeleton, the bones to make those levers and framework. Our next one is integument. So integumentary system is things like hair, skin, nails. It's all the outside stuff, right? So I always tell students every semester, and if you do try this, please report back. Use it as a pickup line. Like, you have a gorgeous integumentary system. I think that would be a great compliment. That's everything on the outside. Yeah, that looks good. And if they know what you're talking about, then you guys have something in common. Like, oh, hey, you've taken an anatomy class before. You know what that means. So with the integumentary system being all of the external things, it does have a role in protection. But so does the next system down. That's your lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is also a protective system. But it does it a little bit differently. So integument, as we talked about, it's the outside stuff. So think of this as your outer protection. It's preventing pathogens from getting in. You're blocking them from actually getting into places where they could make you sick. Versus lymphatic, that's also known as your immune system. What do we do if that pathogen, that bacteria or virus gets in? How do we defend against it? How, things like making antibodies or causing inflammation. So lymphatic system would be our internal protection. And then your last one down here is digestive. And so with digestive, this would be one of those where if you were talking about what is the function, a lot of people might think, oh, it's for eating. Well, there's a difference between function and mechanism. If you even look back to respiratory, the function there is the gas exchange. That's the goal. That's what you're kind of trying to do. The how you do it, that's your mechanism. That would be breathing. So respiratory, the mechanism would be breathing, but gas exchange, your function. Digestive, the mechanism would be eating. That's what you're actively doing, but the why, that's your function, and that's to get nutrients. So this is to break down things and get your nutrition. And that kind of gives you a summary of all of the organ systems that we'll be covering this semester. Now, what I usually recommend is then now you have a column for systems, a column for function. On the other side of that, make a column for structures. And use your notes, use the book, and kind of come up with a few things for each. Try to come up with at least 2 for each of them. I can give you a few recommendations if you'd like. This one does tell you parts that are in it. If you're thinking about doing gas exchange, you're naming the tubes that get the air to the places where you can do gas exchange. Urinary, I did mention you're going to make a sample. So what is the organ that makes that sample? And then where do you store that sample? Reproductive, there are different ones for each gender. And do be comfortable saying the words that are anatomically correct, because this is what this class is, right? Those are body parts. Nervous system, brain, spinal cord, all of those nerves. That's really all you have there. There's a lot of fun things inside of there, subcategories, but those are your main three. Skeletal, you can name different bones. Same for muscular, you can name different muscles. Integument, I already taught you those on this video, so if you don't remember, hit rewind. Lymphatic, you're talking more lymph nodes, spleen, places where you're cleaning out any pathogens that got in. Endocrine, as I mentioned, hormones, that's what's secreted, so you're naming anything that secretes those hormones. There's a wide range there. And digestive, again, it's another pathway. So all of those things along the pathway from mouth all the way to anus, those would be some of the structures you would want to list. All right, everyone, I hope that was helpful.